It may not seem credible to a gal who wears a play suit like this, designed for 1957, that there was nothing nearer to a play suit in the 1860s than the dress for the croquet lawn. Yet croquet represented one of the great advances towards feminine emancipation, a taste for sport. Not that women hadn't taken part occasionally in sports for hundreds of years. In the 18th century, they sometimes played cricket on the village green, but it never seems to have occurred to them to wear any special clothes for the game, merely the far from functional dress of every day. Men were no different from women in that respect. Country girls often ran races. Many were just as fond of physical activity as their descendants today. A piece of ribbon from the local fair might be a treasure to a gal who'd known only village life. But though they tucked up their skirts, they certainly never wore any specially designed clothing. In the 1820s and 30s, a favourite sport for women was archery, and nothing more practical than this was worn for it. Loose and easy clothing was reserved for what were then so freely called the lower orders. Even children had only recently acquired fashions of their own, and they were not very rational compared with those designed by modern standards, though by the standards of the 18th century, they were a wonderful step towards freedom. The parents of these children had been clad merely as small-scale adults, following all the fashions of their elders, and being delighted, no doubt, to do so. Even as late as the 1880s, a washable dress that required no tight lacing was a remarkable novelty for tennis. And within 2 or 3 years, there was this, a veritable suit, or as it was then called, a costume. Just the thing for the most advanced woman to wear for shooting. In the mid-90s, there was this, the woman on the bicycle, an important landmark on the road to feminine freedom. So much so that there were a good many protests against it. And fashion leaders at the end of the century, including the very elegant Queen Alexandra, went yachting in jaunty white suits like this. It was not genuinely practical, though it gave the illusion of a utilitarian style at the time. But fashion and comfort have never settled down together for long, not even in the 20th century, which has made a great contribution to costume history by giving us really functional sports clothes. In the privacy of one's own bedroom, informal clothes came into their own. At the turn of the century, one took one's ease in some such confection as this, the negligee of 1900 or so. Not a very practical gown, because it has a long trailing back and is made of lace. The tea gown of the 1890s is still less suitable for relaxation. This garment with a stiff collar and a bodice fitted tightly over the ribs and long constricting sleeves, who would imagine that it once seemed the last word in boudoir comfort? The beauty of any style of dress is in the eye of the beholder, and quickly vanishes when the fashion goes out. And the comfort is in the knowledge that one is wearing the right thing. Now here is one of the lines of cleavage between the masculine and the feminine attitude towards dress. If men's formal costume is invariably much more formal than women's, as you may judge from this Privy Councillor's full dress, their informal costume tends to be more genuinely informal. That is to say, men really do care about comfortable clothes being comfortable. In the early 18th century, a man couldn't feel that he looked distinguished unless he was wearing clothes of great impressiveness, but startling discomfort. But in the hours of relaxation, his garments, though fashionable, did permit him to relax. He covered his head with a turban, partly because he feared to catch cold after removing the periwig he always wore in public, and partly because a naked head began to seem somewhat indecent when wigs had been essential to the appearance for many years. He wore a loose dressing gown and turned back the ruffles at his wrists, though it would have been ungentlemanly to be seen without them. But the costume undoubtedly permitted a feeling of freedom and ease. The smoking cap was the finishing touch to the informal male dress of the mid-Victorians. Ladies embroidered them in generous quantities for their masculine friends. They were introduced because it was thought that the smell of tobacco smoke in the hair was too overwhelming for female sensitiveness. When not working on smoking caps, a man's sisters, cousins, and aunts might be occupied in embroidering carpet slippers for him. Except for these accessories, very little informal male clothing has survived. And that's why you haven't seen much of it in this film. What happens to it? As it's not valued for its elegance or the great occasions on which it was worn, one's wife might tear it up and make it into a rag rug, as in the 1880s. Or she sends it off to a charity to be given to the poor, as in the 1890s. Or for many centuries past, the valet has taken it as his perquisite. And anyhow, no one has ever been very sentimental about male clothing, and sentiment is one of the principal reasons why women's clothes are sometimes treasured. Is somebody one day going to treasure this? Yes, it will gather about it nostalgia, an old-world charm, a fragrance of romance. Like this. And this. And all these memories of our yesterdays.